Well, good afternoon. And we need to close. And thank you for coming out today. This is our final program of our 2018 Black History Month celebration. I mean, the final program, but we celebrate every day of the year all the time, so, and hopefully you do too. For those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Dr. James Conyers, Director of Africana Studies here at Kean University. And I've been here for approximately 26 years trying to hold down the program ever since Dr. Barbara Wheeler retired. I was her assistant director for all of those years, and now I am the director. I've been the director for at least 16 years now. So, and I have no plans on moving on. I mean, this is what I do. And just a little bit of my own background before we get into the program. I'm a graduate of LaGuardia College in New York City. I'm a product of the City University. I went to Hunter College to study with Dr. John Henry Clark, who was my mentor as well as friend and someone that Lacey knows. And if we don't know who Dr. John Henry Clark is, then we're probably in trouble. And then from there, I got my master's and PhD at Temple University. I was one of the original recruits for Dr. Molefi Asante's program, the first PhD program in the nation in African American Studies at Temple University, and I was one of the first 26. We were all recruited by Dr. Asante, and so I'm a graduate of that program, and of course my degree is in African American Studies and Egyptology, and that's what I now teach here. I'm no longer in the history department. I'm here, as I just finished saying, so I teach Egyptology now, and at another university in college, Medgar Evers College, on Saturdays, I teach the Black Studies courses there. Introduction to African American History and Culture, selected topics in African history and other courses there. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about who I am here. This program that we're going to have here, we thought it was very important to continue it from last year. We had all of the speakers that we're having this series here last year. In fact, we had one new speaker this year who's in the audience, Sergeant Carol Russell, who was excellent. She was a little bit nervous, but I calmed her down a little bit. She was excellent. And so we felt it was necessary, considering all that's happening to people of color in this society and throughout the world for that matter. I saw the same thing in England. I had a conversation with the Bloods and Crips in England, in Manchester and other places. So basically the same types of things are happening all over the place. But we thought it was necessary to bring back our speakers because they were so good and gave us so much information last year that we said, let's bring them back again. And this is not going to be the last time. We will have them back again sometime in the future because this topic, we can't exhaust this topic. It's so important that we continue to discuss this. And it's awful, it's a shame, really, that quite often we cannot get our students to take an interest in this topic and in other things that have to do with our history and our culture and our experience in the Western world as well as in the continent itself to come in. There's no reason why that this room should not be full of people. With the large amounts of people of color on this campus, this room should be full. But as I said before, unless we're having a rap concert before or a rap concert afterward or some type of concert afterwards, generally it's very, very difficult to get people here unless the individual professors bring their classes here. And that's been waning in the last few years where the professors also have not been able to bring their classes for whatever reason. Well, let me just stop whining over that and let's just move on. Today we have a very, very, in my opinion, very, very important speaker. I read his book some years ago, Eyes to My Soul, the Memoirs of a Black FBI Agent, and I said to myself, after hearing him on the radio and seeing him on TV and on different things, I said, I've got to contact this brother. And we reached out, we researched and looked all around and finally got in contact with him. And he came and did a great lecture for us, and then we brought him back again some years later. We had him back last year, and again we brought him back this year because he's full of information and important information, especially in light of all that's going on in this society nowadays and in light of who we have sitting in the White House and who we have sitting in the Justice Department and so on and so forth. So let me just read a little bit of his bio, and then we want to get right into it. Dr. Tyrone Powers, I'm just going to read one paragraph because we want him to get up here and start speaking. Dr. Tyrone Powers is the director of the Homeland Security and Criminal Justice Institute at the Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland. He serves as administrator over numerous degrees and certificate programs, including Homeland Security Management, Intelligence Analytics Certificate, a Maryland State Certified Police Entrance Level Training Academy, Social Justice, Forensic Studies, and Juvenile Justice. As well, he is an expert consultant to several legal teams on criminal and civil law cases concerning civil rights violations, legal, social, and agency policies, law enforcement use of force issues, and police ethics training, tactics, and practices. And so you can see he has a whole lot of experiences, and that's only a small part of the biography. So without further ado, please welcome our brother, our guest speaker, Dr. Tyrone Powers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be back. As always, thank you, Doc, for having me back again. And, of course, my brother and friend, DeLacy Davis. We go back a long time, even when he was investigating me before we became friends, which is a good thing because you should be careful who you sit down and break bread with. I think for those of us who have read the Bible, you know, the Last Supper, right? You can be sitting down and eating with your friends one day and crucified the next, so you got to be careful who you break bread with. Sergeant Carol Russell, thank you so much. You picked me up this morning. Thank you very much for your friendship. You're great people. A couple of things here. I just want to start again by saying that, of course, you know, you always want more people here and all, but I do understand, and most of us who understand the significance and the importance of Black History Month understand how we got here where young people or people don't care as much about understanding the concepts of Black history, because Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was the founder of Negro History Week and then eventually Black History Month, clearly indicated that, you know, if you control a people's thinking, you don't have to worry about their actions. So unless, in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, unless you educate people properly, then they won't know when to show up, where to show up. And I blame part of that. So I don't want to condemn the young people in general, and I think Sergeant DeLacy Davis would agree with me on this. A lot of it is with our educators at a young age, elementary, middle school, high school. They don't get the information. They don't understand the history. And a lot of times, a lot of the tricks and traps that they fall into, that they are falling into now, is because nobody interceded and intervened in their lives to point them in another direction. So this information doesn't seem as important to them, when in reality it could change their life and change their condition significantly, because we were born and we're supposed to win, and then what we're seeing in today's on the streets of our cities is a tragic result of miseducation, and again, that's extremely significant in this Black History Month. Of course, we're looking at, you know, the fact that we're here on February the 21st, which is the day that Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. The day in and of itself has a significant debate that should have brought people in, because this is a significant day. You know, Malcolm X assassinated on this day, even as we research and study Black History Month. So what I'm going to talk about, and if I need some help, Sergeant DeLacy Davis is going to help me, because it's hot up in here. And if he see me faint, he said he's just going to record it first. Then he'll take over. He's going to record it and keep it, send it out to friends and family members, and then help me out with it. But what I want to talk a little bit about is, and I've been involved, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them here, in some court cases recently. I just came off a trial last week in a major case as an expert witness in Baltimore County, Maryland, on Corin Gaines, which is a significant case because her family was awarded $37 million for police misconduct, which is an unprecedented amount for a lawsuit, a jury to award in that case. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of that and so on and so forth as we go back to this. For Black people, people of color in general, unfortunately, policing have always been about control, about controlling the people, not to serve and protect. Initially, as we know, that policing was the term we used. It meant policing to serve and protect, and now we use law enforcement, which simply means that I'm going to use force to make you follow the law. The word serve and protect is no longer there because we call it law enforcement as opposed to policing. And if you go back over that history, you'll understand that that term really changed during the 1960s, a lot of it due to the movements with black people. So during the 1960s, we switched off from policing to serve and protect to law enforcement, using force in the title itself to make you follow. So then it became a controlling mechanism. More controlling mechanism than to serve and protect the people. And that's what we've seen with the various 1960 events, some of them depicted on here, you know, with the Black Panther Party. The goal of policing was to control them. J. Edgar Hoover, whose picture is on the screen, who was the director of the FBI, when they asked him about the concept of law and order, and this is a direct quote from him during the 1960s, he said, damn the law, we're going to have order. And that was his response to how he was going to deal with the black community. People said to him, you're supposed to be involved with law and order. He said, damn law, we're going after order. So it became a controlling mechanism in our communities. The significance of that is for us to understand that because as we were taught during my time in the FBI Academy, and most of us know from our common sense, you can never effectively counter that which you do not fully understand. And the importance of knowing this history, the reason history is so important, because you can't develop a mechanism to change your life or to do better or to change our young people unless you understand that history. History is so extremely important. When I talk to young people all the time, I always explain to them that you all say you don't like history. What you really don't like is the way history's been taught. You've got some bootleg history teachers who haven't made history relevant to your particular situation, because technically everybody loves history, right? You go in to have brain surgery, you ask your doctor, has he done this before? You ask him about his history. If he says no, or if he says yes, but I'm 0 for 7, then that becomes significant to you, right? So in a sense, we're always concerned about history if I can make it relevant to your situation. If history seems abstract, then you don't want to hear it. What does the Civil War have to do with me? What does COINTELPRO have to do with me? And as I mentioned when I was here last year, when I was in Harlem speaking at a school there, and one of the young people said I mentioned COINTELPRO, and I was discussing it and the history of it, and the young man on the front row stood up and said, Doc, can you just tell us what COINTELPRO is? He said, because nobody teaches us that. We don't get it in elementary, middle, or high school. We didn't know there was a counterintelligence program designed to divide and conquer us, designed to have us fight, designed to create what we have today in the Crips and Bloods. We didn't know there was a government program, which are actually government documents for, indicating that this was their goal. Nobody teaches us that. We've had social studies in elementary school and middle school and high school. We've had history, but there's no part of it that talks about COINTELPRO. Geronimo Pratt indicated that until black people understand the significance and the impact of COINTELPRO, we will always be at each other's throats. Right? So that history part is so important and so significant from that standpoint. So I want to talk a little bit, and I know I'm going to not be able to cover all the history right here, but the significance and the relevancy of it for us to understand it as grown folks, the people who are here in this audience, to consistently kind of talk to young people about this. I mean, sometimes with young people, you got to trick them into freedom. You know what I mean? Then you got to guide them to greatness. You understand? Sometimes you just can't sit down and have a lecture with them pontificating about using all these big words and so on and so forth. You got to trick them into freedom. And if they got this COINTELPRO thing, they could completely understand what's going on in our streets today and in our communities. Within 1 year of the formation of the Black Panther Party, the FBI established a special counterintelligence program called COINTELPRO to neutralize political dissidents. Think about that. Not to neutralize criminals. If you did not agree with the politics of the government, which was almost a supremacy politics at that time, if you did not agree with those politics, then they wanted to neutralize you. They created a program designed to neutralize any kind of black education, political dissidents, to neutralize us educating our young children and our children's children. They created an entire program. And then, in the course of that program, they indicated that these was going to be the tactics. Now, the beautiful thing about this is not a conspiracy theory. The government, under the Freedom of Information Act, have released all this information. It's all open to the public. That we did this is why we did this, and we apologize for it. The problem is that even though it's open to the public so that we can give it to our young people so they will know what happened, we don't go back and get it. We absolutely don't go back and get it, so the young people are not able to do anything with it because we don't bring it to them. In all of my classes that I teach at the college and in other places, the lectures I do, I always bring this home to them, and they are shocked to understand that this was intentional. And in fact, they write in their paperwork that we're going to do it by infiltration and deception. We're going, every organization, every progressive black organization, we're going to put somebody in that organization. Every progressive black organization, we're going to recruit someone. Now, again, don't take my word for it. The documents are online. The government had to release them all. And they recruited blacks to sit in every organization to disrupt that organization. They recruited agent provocateurs. Everybody know what an agent provocateur is? Is that because some of you are them? I mean, anybody know what they are? Anyone? What they do is you put them in an organization, and you have an agenda. You know, Sergeant DeLacy Davis have an agenda. This is what the meeting is going to be about. And the agent provocateur doesn't want him to get to the end of that agenda, so they keep interrupting. They keep provoking him to go in another direction. They keep saying things that make him angry, so he never gets to the end of his agenda. So they provoke activity. That's their job. They talk about agent provocateurs, about how they were going to put agent provocateurs in the NAACP, how they were going to put them in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, how they were going to put them in the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And they believed this about us. Even during the time that I was in the FBI, they believed this about us, that we loved gossip. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but they believe that if they put someone in our organizations to spread gossip about other people in the organizations, they could destroy that organization even if everything they were spreading was a lie, because we didn't check out the gossip. In other words, if Sergeant Russell called Sergeant DeLacy tonight and Sergeant Russell said, I heard that so-and-so was doing this, then Sergeant Davis would just go and spread that information without checking it out. So they believe that if they could get one person in an organization to spread gossip, it would go throughout the organization, everybody would repeat it, and nobody would check out whether the information was right or wrong, and you could destroy and discredit a person's entire reputation based on that philosophy. And guess what? They were extremely effective. They destroyed organizations by putting agent provocateurs into those meetings. They infiltrated those organizations. They hired and put people in there to separate the people in the organizations. And it was relatively, as sad as it is to say, it was relatively easy, because you could put someone in the organization and they could say, look, you know, I think Carol Russell, I think she's giving information to the FBI about our plans here at the NAACP. And say, why do you say that? Look how she walked. You see how she walked? She walked like, she walked a little different. And then the person you're telling that to, without checking that out, will start talking, yeah, she does walk a little different. They would go tell someone else. That's how easy it was to influence us, because the philosophy was we wouldn't check it out. We just spread all the information we get. And it was extremely effective. It was extremely effective. Look at our organizations today. Look at the SELC, the NAACP, if you will, some of the other organizations. The most difficult organization they had trouble with doing that with was the Nation of Islam, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said all publicity was good or bad, so he just used it in his favor. He used the momentum, so they weren't really successful. So the FBI wrote in their documents that they would just have to wait till he died and then take over that organization. But they were very successful in infiltration and deception. So much so in deception, and I want you to kind of do your own research on this, so much so in deception that Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver became almost stark enemies with each other, because they believed that one was denigrating the other based on letters that the FBI sent to each other, and in their handwriting. They were able to identically copy their handwriting. And instead of calling each other and saying, look, did you really write this? They believed that these letters was true, and they almost became, they divided the Black Panther Party for self-defense. They actually believed that's how good they were at this process of COINTELPRO. We've got to understand that because we're seeing that happen a great deal in a lot of our organizations today. And then harassment and intimidation was another one of their methods, their stated methods. J. Edgar Hoover called Dr. King the most notorious liar in the country. He asked him to commit suicide, told him that he had information on him having an affair, and told him that the only way that he wouldn't expose it is that if he committed suicide. All this is released documents. The director of the FBI requested that Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. commit suicide. And it's all released information. It's all released information. He requested that he commit suicide. So they had deception, they had infiltration, they had harassment and intimidation in order to break up our organizations and, as they indicated in the COINTELPRO papers, to divide the young from the old. Their goal was to divide us in terms of generations, blacks in terms of generations, so we would be fighting against each other. In fact, in San Diego, and you can get this online, the FBI has released a document, the FBI was rewarding their agents for causing violence between the youth groups in San Diego. The SAC of San Diego wrote a letter to the director of the FBI, and he said, look, there was violence in San Diego last night. Two black groups fought, was involved in killing each other off, and we want credit for that because you would get promotions or you could get extra money if you divided them. Right? These documents are released, so you can kind of see where we got here today. That's the importance of their history because they instigated violence amongst each other. And again, these are released documents. These are released documents. And as grown folks, I hope that we go back and get them, even if others don't, our young people don't get them. And we should make them part of every lecture. We should talk to our teachers about making them part of every social studies class. They should be part of every history class. And they should be part of every criminal justice course. All right? Assistant Director William Sullivan recommended increased coverage of communist influence on the Negro. The FBI goal in targeting King was clear: to find avenues of approach aimed at neutralizing King as an effective Negro leader. They thought he was a messiah. He had too much power. Now, again, let's talk a little bit about Dr. King. Dr. King's speech that we hear every year, certainly during Black History Month, is what? What speech? I have a dream. Now, you got to remember this. That was a very powerful speech. Well done, very powerful speech. But that speech took place in 1963. This is when I think it's important for us, as grown folks and as educators, to understand this. Dr. King was killed when? 1968. So why are we not hearing the speeches he gave between 63 and 68? Because technically you mature, you learn more, you become stronger. But we keep going back to that 1963 speech because really, not only in terms of whites, but there's a lot of blacks that cannot handle the 1967 and 1968 Dr. King, right? It was Dr. King in 1968 who said to the black church, quoting from the Bible, you had a zeal for God, not according to knowledge. You got more religion in your hands and feet than in your heart and head. Then he said, we've got 1 billion Christians in the world. Hell, if all the Christians did Christian work, we wouldn't have the problems we have. We couldn't stand that. We couldn't have that kind of, we couldn't handle that kind of Dr. King. The Dr. King that later met with Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and all these other people, not because he was changing his religion, but he was changing his strategy. That's the King that we really couldn't have. And we certainly couldn't handle the King when King began to speak of the Vietnam War and the Vietnam conflict, because even people in his own organization told him, you need to not talk about Vietnam, those people over there. You need to be just dealing with black people. He said no. That's when he came out with his statement that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So if you are against injustice, I don't care whether it's being done in Vietnam or whether it's being done in Newark. You need to be speaking up on it. That's where your moral compass should be at. That's what Dr. King said during that time, and people abandoned him, walked away from him because of his philosophy with that, right? Think about this. We've been involved in conflicts, not necessarily wars, because we haven't declared a war since World War II, because only Congress can declare war. So we've been involved in conflicts. Imagine a preacher today Dr. King was a minister, speaking in 1968 about the Vietnam War and saying this from a podium. He said that we are talking about the United States. This is really bold. He said we are criminals in that war. This is a preacher, Dr. King, talking about this country. He said we've committed more war crimes than almost any nation in the world. And he said, I'm going to continue to say it because God didn't create America to do what it's doing in the world today. Can you imagine? Tell me when you've heard any preacher discuss the war in Afghanistan, discuss the war in Iraq, discuss the war in Syria, and it really doesn't matter. Let me just make this perfectly clear, at the risk of ruffling some feathers, who the president is, because the fact of the matter is President Obama was in office for 8 years and we ain't bombed nothing but African nations. So King would have spoke out against you no matter what your color was. I guarantee you if he would have said today, he was saying that, you know, we had numerous wars during the 8 years of President Barack Obama, but we ain't never bombed anything but people of color. The only bad people in the world during 8 years of Obama's administration were people of color. Now, there may be a reason for that, but imagine a preacher having the guts to say that. That's why the FBI said this guy's kind of a messiah. He is saying things most preachers or pastors or leaders try to protect their reputation, try to make everybody happy. This man is saying things just based solely on, kind of like a messiah, based solely on justice. And he doesn't care whether who feathers, who ruffle. He's talking about the black church. He's talking about the white church, right? His letter from the Birmingham jail, where he clearly indicated that he was upset with some of his white brethren who was in the ministry, who think they could set the timetable for another man's freedom. He said the greatest threat to black liberation was not the Ku Klux Klan or the white city council. He said it was the moderate and liberal white who think that who can wrap their hate in the garments of love and make you think they are loving you when they're really hating you. The greatest threat, he said, to our freedom was the people who convinced us that they were on our sides, but never helped us except as it fit their timetable. Read his letter from the Birmingham jail. Reading all of this, the FBI said this is a dangerous man because he truly have a moral compass, as opposed to a lot of other people who say what they need to say just to get by. You have a moral compass. That's a difficult situation for a lot of us. Hoover got permission from Attorney General Robert Kennedy. And I just mentioned this real quick to say this, because we love the Kennedys. I know when I was growing up, my mother had a picture of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and I guess it was Robert, somebody else on the wall, right? But the fact of the matter is, when King was in prison in Birmingham, and Robert Kennedy came to King, came to his brother, John, and said, look, we got to get Dr. King out of prison because he could be killed tonight. And John F. Kennedy said, according to Robert Kennedy in his book, Robert Kennedy wrote a book called there's a book called Robert Kennedy in his own words. He said, his brother said, I ain't losing no sleep over no niggas. That was John F. Kennedy, the John F. Kennedy we love. Robert Kennedy went and got him out because he thought it would be a disaster. But John F. Kennedy went to bed, right? So history is so important for us to read so we can decipher and understand and speak truth to power and to the powerless. All right? We can't keep delving in ignorance, giving our children ignorance, and somehow expect them to be better off for it. Right? Has to be knowledge. COINTELPRO had the support of local police departments, the Black Panther parties. Now, you got to understand this about the Black Panther Party, and then I'll let it go. The Black Panther Party was initially called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, right? They had Breakfast for Children program. They had free health clinics, right? Because they went with what Marcus Garvey had said. Marcus Garvey said, you keep asking people to join the revolution, and Marcus Garvey said, sick and hungry people don't make good revolutionaries. If you poor and hungry, you can't ask people to go out and protest. People need to eat. They need clothing. They need shelter. Take care of that, and then you've got a revolutionary. He said, what we try to do is ask everybody why you ain't out there with me. Because I got to eat. I got to feed my family, right? So the Black Panther Party, understanding that if they were going to have a movement, they first needed to make sure that the people were healthy. You have to have free health care clinics. Many of our young people go to school today, cavities, abscess in their mouth. How do you study algebra with a toothache and you don't have health insurance? How do you do that? And we say, well, the children are not paying attention. They're not studying in class. If they're hungry or if they are sick, and a lot of them are sick, physically sick, because they don't get physicals every year like the rest of us. They're sitting in the classroom in pain, and you want to know why they can't study math and algebra. That's on us to take care of, right? The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense did that. They understood that philosophy. Some of us jump past that now. We condemn and we criticize very quickly without fixing the way they did. J. Edgar Hoover called them the greatest threat in the country because of what they were doing. Not so much because they were walking around with guns and leather jackets. He could deal with that. But because they were feeding children. And here's the deal. Their Breakfast for Children program was so successful. Go read the COINTELPRO papers because you really got to see this. That the FBI said we got to poison the food, which would turn the parents against the Black Panther Party and have a rebellion against them. And factually, go online, look it up, look at the government sites, they poisoned the food for the Breakfast for Children program of the Black Panther Party. They actually poisoned the food. Then, once people began, because we're very easily swayed, we don't think about that, once they turned against the program, once the Breakfast for Children program was destroyed, then the government said, you know what, but the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense really was on to something. Because if you, the people, whoever feed them, they're likely to listen to. Because there was no Breakfast for Children program in any school system in the United States of America until the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense started. Now we have those programs, right? But we don't know the history, so we don't give credit to the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And how are our children going to know that if we don't know it and if we don't teach it? That this is where it started, the free health clinics, to make people healthy. That Marcus Garvey's contribution was saying that I can't ask you to join my movement if you're sick, right? If you're hungry, I can't do that. How are our children going to know that unless we study that, unless we give that research? Again, Breakfast for Children program, they fed every child, no cost. You just showed up and they fed you every single day. But that ain't the Black Panther Party we hear about. We just see leather jackets and shotguns. We don't hear about the Breakfast for Children program and the free health clinics. Now, the information is out there, right? But we got to go get it. We got to go get it, right? Because then it makes that party a lot more significant, right? Well, I mean, we should do it while the Black Panther movie is out. It's a good time to research the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. They fed the children. This is the actual FBI document. The Breakfast for Children program has been instituted by the Black Panther Party in several cities to provide... Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. You my boss too? Okay. The Breakfast for Children program has been instituted by in several cities to provide stable breakfast for ghetto children. The program has met with some success and has resulted in considerable favorable publicity. Right? We can't have that. The resulting publicity tends to portray the Black Panther Party in a favorable lights and cloud their violent nature of the group and its ultimate aim of insurrection. The BCP promotes at least task of BPP among Native individuals, and what is more distressing, provides BPP with a ready audience composed of highly impressible youths. This is their document indicating that they had to destroy the Breakfast for Children program. They said people are actually liking the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Parents are actually liking their children being fed. They're actually listening to the Black. This is a whole nother part of the Black Panther Party that people didn't even know about. He said, we got to keep them highlighted with the leather jackets and the shotguns. We cannot have them being known for feeding children and giving free health care. So we've got to destroy this program. And you know what? They were extremely successful because there's many of us today that don't know the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense did this. And certainly many of our children don't know that the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense did this. Or we don't even teach it in our classes in social studies. All right? Geronimo Pratt, I don't know if any of you read his book. It's an excellent book if you get a chance to read it. When he talks about COINTELPRO, of course, he was wrongfully convicted, imprisoned, actually left the country and died in Africa. I think he was 63. Yeah, and he died in Africa. But his books talks about this entire issue. He tried to lay it out for everyone about what happened with the Black Panther Party for self-defense, what happened with their Breakfast for Children programs, what happened with their free health clinic, how they were divided. He goes into detail about how they were divided, and his book is excellent. It's called Last Man Standing. All right, so if you get a chance to read that, that'll help you with this too. Of course, Fred Hampton was 21. Everybody familiar with the Fred Hampton story? He was an up-and-coming riser with the Black Panther Party for self-defense. It was set up. They thought he was remarkable, amazing, exceptional. He was going to be the new Messiah at the age of 21. And remember what Fred Hampton had done. He was with the Black Panther Party, right? But Fred Hampton was uniting all groups. He would go out in the morning and do exercise and say, black power for black people, white power for white people, Asian power for Asian people, and people were gravitating towards him. He was set up by the FBI and assassinated in his bedroom in his apartment, shot up. His wife was shot. She was pregnant. Killed him in his bed, in his sleep. Major story. The FBI eventually settled with his family, admitted that they did it, and settled with his family, but it didn't bring Fred Hampton back, right? Which is another important story. 21 years of age, though. So when young people, and that's what I always try to emphasize. That's why I think it's important to emphasize this to young people about leadership, because you know, Elijah Muhammad built the Nation of Islam. He had a third-grade education. So don't tell me what you're not capable of based on your academic ability, if you really have a passion for it. Malcolm X dropped out of school in the 8th grade and ended up speaking at Yale and Harvard and all over the world. So I always remind young people, no matter what people say about you not being educated, let me give you a list of people who didn't have that education, who did great things. Before you condemn yourself and believe that you have no choice but to go commit crime or take drugs or something else because you don't have the appropriate education, let me give you a history of what people without the appropriate education did to achieve greatness. Once they hear that, they sit back and they see and say, you know what, I might not be as bad as people say I am. I may not be as bad, but you got to give them those stories, because otherwise they only believe that if you have advanced degrees, can you be something, and then they choose to do something else. All right, we got to give them those stories. No one else is going to give them that. All right, just relatively quickly, police shootings. Whites represented 76.9% of the American population, 392. The most important area I want to concentrate on here now is blacks. 13.3% of the American population, but 23%, and it kind of shifted, the PowerPoint shifted, of the shootings. I want to get into more of that in a minute, all right? From 19, and I'm going to go back over this historically because I know I got, what's the time? Oh, do I? Really? Oh, okay. All right, thank you. All right, from 18, give me a time to get, because I want to get into the Coin Gaines case in a little bit. From 1882 to 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the United States. Of those people that were lynched, 3,446 were black. If the 2017 police shooting rates continue over the next 86 years, 16,426 black people will die at the hands of police. Sometimes you got to put these things into academic and historical process to say we got to do something about this. We cannot allow this to happen. And I'm telling you, by putting it in these kind of numbers, this is how young people get it. My grandmother used to always say, put it down where the goats can get it. The statistical and pie charts and all make sense, but if you can kind of put it there where everyone can understand it, then more people will say, we got something's wrong here. We've got to do something about this. We've got to intercede in this or intervene in this. Now, not everyone we have to tell that. Of course, DeLacy, you know, with Black Cops Against Police Brutality, have been doing this a long time to avoid these kind of numbers that we're looking at now. But between 2005, April 2017, 80 officers have been arrested on murder or manslaughter charges for on-duty shootings. During that 12-year span, 35% were convicted, while the rest were pending or not convicted. Statistics tell the story in and of themselves. You take time to absorb them, and I know we're not going to absorb them all. Among the officers charged since 2005 for fatal shootings, more than 3/4 were white. Nearly all other cases involved black officers who killed black victims. Right? So there's a philosophy of controlling black lives by using lethal violence, more so than anyone else. And I just got to say this, because I think DeLacy have said this on a number of occasions. I know Sergeant Carol Russell has said this. The philosophy in policing sometimes goes beyond the color of the officer doing the shooting. If you believe that the people you are policing are simply to be controlled, doesn't matter whether you are black, white, or Hispanic officer, you will be more willing to use deadly force against people who you believe is next to nothing. You will be more likely to use deadly force against people who you believe that it's acceptable to use that kind of force against. Right? The numbers bear that out. Right? Common defenses, we're all familiar with these. I've had to deal with them on a number of occasions. I serve as an expert witness in police cases all the time. Like I said, I just finished a trial about 2 weeks ago, my part of it, the Core and Gaines case, Baltimore County. I'll talk about that a little bit. Common defenses for police officers: I thought I saw a gun. I feared for the safety of my fellow officers. There's a major Supreme Court case talked about the objective reasonableness of a police officer at the time that he or she fired their weapon, whether they thought that their life was under imminent threat of danger or someone else's life was under imminent threat of danger or severe bodily harm. So the officers know that now. So in most of the paperwork, that's the language you'll get. He lunged at me. She didn't obey my orders. I thought he was going for a weapon. I didn't think he needed help. And that's in the case of mental health cases. So you will notice in most of these police shooting cases, these are the language that come up over and over and over again in terms of why they use deadly force. Freddie Gray case. These are the officers who were indicted by Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney in Baltimore. None of them were convicted in that case in Baltimore. But think about this, if you just think about it without going through the whole Freddie Gray situation. Freddie Gray was chased down by the police simply because he ran. Think about this. So Freddie Gray is dead now. He's gone. Put in the back of a paddy wagon. Neck, back severed. Coroner said it was a severe sever, like a snapping of his neck in the back of a paddy wagon. Think about his crime now, because this is the important part to analyze with that. Why was he ever arrested or put in the back of the paddy wagon at all? Because the police said they were in a high crime area and he ran. So Freddie Gray is dead now because police believed that he could have been doing something wrong, chased him down, put him in the back of that paddy wagon, and his neck was snapped. So when you identify or target a people as being the criminal element, they can die under any kind of circumstances. And that's what we saw in the Freddie Gray case. Again, all the officers, none of the officers were convicted in that case, even though State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby made a very significant move by even charging them, which was unique anywhere in this country for them to even been charged with these particular actions. I think they're all still on the Baltimore City Police Department. We have a new commissioner in Baltimore, Daryl D'Souza, and someone sent a memo from in the department. Now, he said he's not going to go with the recommendation, suggesting that Alicia White, the African-American woman in this, be transferred to Internal Affairs. Yeah, I know. And he turned her down. He said, no, why would you recommend, after the Freddie Gray situation and her being charged as part of the Freddie Gray situation, that now we send her to Internal Affairs? But the fact of the matter is, it gives you the culture and the concept of a police department when somebody in there would be bold enough to recommend someone who was involved in this particular situation to work in Internal Affairs. A lot of work to be done in the departments. Marilyn Mosby, of course, have come under attack now. She has an election next year. There's a number of people running against her, and there's a lot of her, the money for her opposition is being funded by some of the police unions and so on and so forth because of her taking this bold step. So we'll see how that goes. Corn Gaines story. Anybody familiar with the Corn Gaines case? It just ended 2 weeks ago. I was the expert on that case. Corn Gaines, no doubt, this is her and her son, suffered from some mental illness. She was stopped in a traffic stop by Baltimore County Police Department officers. She had a confrontation with them in a traffic stop. The officer in the traffic stop handled it well. They ended up giving her a ticket, so on and so forth. She videotaped it. She put it out on Facebook. She had a conversation back between them with her son. A little later, maybe a month or two later, she had a date for her traffic ticket, didn't show up. So the police eventually issued a warrant for her. They went to her apartment in Randallstown, Maryland, to make the arrest. They knocked on her door. They said they heard sounds inside. It sounded like somebody was there, even though she didn't answer. They went and got the key to the apartment. They came back. They opened the, tried to open the door. The chain lock was across the door. They said when they saw the chain lock, they saw Corn Gaines sitting in there on the floor, and she had a shotgun. Legally owned shotgun, legally purchased shotgun. So they kicked in the door. She told them to leave. They called out the SWAT team. They called out other tactical units, and they considered it a barricade situation. Now, I just want to remind you of this now, because this is what's so key. All of this is based on what? A traffic ticket for failure to appear. All right, which means you could have really gotten her anytime. She could have came out later on. Doesn't matter whether you get her next week. So they surround her apartment essentially. She's in the apartment. They bring in a negotiator to talk her down. Her son is in the apartment with her. The negotiator's there to talk her down. Eventually, one of the sergeants there, Sergeant Nero, tell everybody else, just calm down. Time is on our side. You know, we know she's got some mental illness problems. We know she didn't take her medication, and it's only a traffic ticket, right? Eventually, Sergeant Royce Ruby, who's part of the tactical unit, allegedly from outside the apartment, says something to the effect that, according to a neighbor, that he's tired of this, and he fires a weapon into the apartment. There's some other things that take place in between. Fires it through a wall, hits her in the back, severs her spine with the bullet. The bullet, she's holding a baby, so it severs her spine. Goes through the jaw of her son, who's in this picture, and then goes to his elbow and shatters his elbow. During the course of that trial, in his first two initial reports, Officer Ruby never indicates that he fired his shot because he thought that he was under imminent threat of death or severe bodily injury. He said he fired his shot because she was pointing the gun at other officers who was at the hinge of the door. 3 other officers there at the scene, so there was nobody at the hinge of the door. 10 days later, Officer Ruby did another report, lawyers there, FOP lawyers there, in that report, he never said that he feared for his life or that she pointed the gun at him. It wasn't until he got to trial that he said that he feared for his life because she had pointed the gun at him. Well, the evidence in the case didn't indicate that. And I was, when I testified on the stand, the fact of the matter is that he said that when he fired the shot, all he could see was her ponytail and the barrel of the shotgun, which means that she was behind this wall, which means that she could not have been, he would have had to see her head, her hands, and everything else for her to be pointing the gun at him, right? After a 2-week trial in this case, and I'm just abbreviating it for the sake of this conversation, for the sake of this presentation, the jury came back. Uniquely, though, because you never really get a jury like this. We got a jury, they got a jury in this particular case of all women. I think it was 4 white, 2 African-American women in this particular case. And Baltimore County was really difficult to win a civil lawsuit, especially against the police department. But uniquely in this case, the jury came back saying that he shouldn't have fired the shot, that she was not of imminent threat to him or anyone else. And in a remarkable way that every newspaper had reported on, from the New York Times to the Los Angeles Times, this award was quite remarkable. The reward was $37 million. $32 million to Cody, which is her son. He will see that when he reached the age, but $32 million to her son, and then various amounts to other members of the family. And it's a unique situation because here you had a situation where clearly you have someone who is mentally ill, and there is some indication historically that there's less patience when you're dealing with people of color in these particular situations. And you finally had a jury that you made this argument to, all this historical information that we're telling you about, all the facts of the case. You had extremely very competent lawyers. You had the discrepancies in the testimony and so on and so forth. But finally, and it may be a lesson to maybe police departments going forward, that there are people who are saying that those lists of things that I gave you before, you know, that I thought they was reaching for a gun, that I was maybe not go over all the time. So it's a significant case, just decided 2 weeks ago, because the hope is, because of the amount, because immediately after this, the local politicians in Baltimore came back out and said, and Baltimore County came out and said, well, they got to get more training or something. Usually that's not the response, but when they got to put out $37 million, that's what it's for. What I liked, too, was the closing argument. Ken Ravenel, who represented the family members, the side that was involved with representing the county indicated that this was just a money grab, that the reason they were filing this lawsuit was for money in their closing argument. And then Ken Ravenel, who represented Cody Gaines in this case, said, you know what? You can have all the money in this case if you can bring Cody's mother back. Because the reason for civil suits, and the reason that the amount in civil suits need to be so high, is that it deters actions. It makes police departments say, if one officer is going to cost us $37 million, then we can do, because they may actually have agreed with his philosophy. But the fact of the matter is, if one officer is going to cost us $37 million, then we need to change our behavior in terms of how we act on the community. And so, if we are to change the behavior in certain police departments, if we are to change the philosophy of targeting people of color, then it's going to take these kind of lawsuits and these kind of actions and maybe these kind of jury awards to change that particular behavior. Because it seems that, logically, this is what they understand. These kind of lawsuits, these kind of repercussions and consequences for these cases. Unfortunately, we can't bring Cody Gaines back again. Her son, the psychiatrist who was in court with her during the course of this trial, as said, Cody constantly talks about he wanted to go back to the apartment and put his mom's bones back in her body again. Because remember, she was shot once through the wall that severed her spine, and then Officer Ruby turned the corner and fired 3 more shots, center mass into her chest with the son close by. tragic condition, tragic situation. And the fact of the matter is that Cody's in special counseling at Johns Hopkins Hospital. You almost have to get people, I don't care what color, nationality, because remember what I mentioned, the majority, the jury was majority white. You almost have to personalize these stories, because in general, people see these stories. You got to personalize these stories for people to see when you have one of these police shootings that are unjustified, when you have these targetings of people of color unjust, there's a lot of people hurt in these situations. There are a lot of pain that is delivered in these situations. And you have to personalize them to get people to see that. All right? So that's a very powerful case. Last but not least, anybody familiar with this case? You're gonna be talking about this one for a long time, DeLacy. So this is the Gun Trace Task Force unit in Baltimore City. It's a special unit of police officers designed to do nothing else but to take guns off the street in Baltimore. Right? So last week, the last two of these were convicted. The entire unit, every single person in the unit has been convicted of robbery, planting drugs on people, over 3,000 cases in which they planted drugs on individuals. Those cases are going to have to be reviewed or dismissed. Robbery, in one of the cases, one of the officers said he got tired of chasing someone and he shot him in the back. Now, that's the testimony of the officers. This is not testimonies of someone accusing the officers. 6 out of the 8 pled guilty, and as part of their plea deal, they had to tell what they did. Their entire unit of police officers, every single one of them convicted now. The last two, again, went to trial and was convicted last week. The first 6 that pled guilty knowing that they were looking at 20 years. So if you know you're looking at 20 years and you plead guilty, then you must really be guilty. The other 2 who did not plead guilty, who was convicted last week in a trial in Baltimore City, are facing up to 40 to 60 years in prison. Marcus, who's up top on the right, my left, your right, was a student of mine at the college before he went into the police department. I don't know, I guess he became a part of the unit, but Marcus is 28 years old. He's facing 60 years in prison for the crimes that he did. He pled not guilty, and then he was found guilty last week for the crimes he did associated with this unit. Now, understand, if you get a chance to go back and look at the testimony, because this is too a clear indication of how policing is done in minority communities. If you go look at the testimony in this particular case, they were in a high-speed chase. The chase went bad. The guy they shouldn't have been chasing in the first place. The chase went bad. The guy died, and then one of the officers say, "Go get the drugs and I'll put in the car. This looks bad." They testified that they all carried toy guns in case they had to shoot someone. They could put the toy guns down next to the body. They testified. This is not someone accusing them about planting drugs on people. And then the citizens of Baltimore came back and said, "We've been telling you this for years, but everybody thinks that in the black community we were just lying about this." Now the officers themselves, the entire Gun Trace Task Force unit, everyone in that unit was involved in planting drugs on black people in Baltimore City. Everyone in that unit was involved in robbing drug dealers. And in fact, there's another indicted police officer in Philadelphia who's in jail now because they would take the heroin when they did rob the drug dealers off the street in Baltimore and send it to the detective in Philadelphia. Well, he's in jail because he was involved. He was helping with this scenario. And he allegedly called back and told one of them that if they testified, he was going to have to visit their children. This is a detective threatening the lives of the children of one of these detectives in Baltimore City. So he's in jail with no bond in Philadelphia awaiting his trial. This is the entire gun trace task force unit. I'm just trying to tell you, Denzel Washington Training Day had nothing on them. And guess what? They said they had been doing this since 2005. Do you know how many lives have been ruined? How many people now have criminal records? In fact, during the course after they came out and admitted this, a federal judge who had chastised someone who was convicted of a drug violation, who had spent 9 years in prison, brought him back to court and apologized to him because he realized now the guy had no criminal record whatsoever, was convicted based on drugs planted on him by these guys. That means that it could be any one of you tonight that these guys could have planted drugs on, and you could have done 9 years in prison for the judge to come back and say, I apologize, but I believe the officers to the extent. 3,000 cases now. There are people sitting in prison. There's people who've been brutalized. There's young people who now have had to leave school, had to lose their education because these guys planted drugs on them. And the good thing about it, if there's any good thing about it, is it's not an accusation. They've confessed to doing it. It's in their testimony. They're saying this is what we did, and this is how we did it from 2005 forward. Right? And according to the FBI, who's involved in the investigation, this is not the end of it. Because their philosophy is that if an entire unit could have been doing this from 2005, somebody else have to know about it. But again, in our communities, the reason we were able to accept that, when people said that I didn't do it, I had drugs, the reason that we were able to reject, because they have convinced even some of us that if the police say this is what happened, this is how it had to happen. I believe that this case right here maybe changed that thinking for a very long time. This is the faces. Now, none of them have been sentenced yet, but all of them are coming up for sentencing. And I just hope, no matter what city you're in, that you go back and read these cases, and more importantly, read the testimony of these officers. Because even to us, even to those of us who understand how this happened, the testimony of these officers, when you read it, is going to be shocking to you. Pull it up online today and read the testimony of the officers of the Gun Trace Task Force Unit in Baltimore City. Read the testimony of the officers, and it's going to be shocking to you how they did it, how long they did it, and how many innocent people they put over in jail since at least 2005, right? And got away with it. The entire unit. The one unit responsible for moving drugs and guns off the street. Then you want to know why Baltimore, on yesterday, right, was announced the most violent city in the United States of America. Right? But think about this. When you have guns from the gun trace unit being put back on the street, when the police in this particular situation are as bad as the bad guys, then the people have no one they fear both the cops and the robbers. And that's a hell of a condition to be in. When you fear both the cops and the robbers, then that's a chaotic position to be in. Lastly, to top this off, a former Baltimore City commander last week, who now works for, I think, Harford County, was arrested at his house because he was involved in a domestic violence situation with his wife. So they went to his house, they arrested him, his wife was brutalized pretty bad, and his wife said she feared that he was going to come back and he had guns in the house. So the Harford County Police confiscated the guns in the house. Sergeant Davis, one of the guns in the house came from the evidence locker in Baltimore City from a murder that hadn't gone to trial yet. How does a former commander in Baltimore City have a gun from the evidence locker in his house, in his gun collection, in his home in Harford County? You understand what I'm saying? So a lot of the chaos that we see in the cities, we know we have things to do with our young people. We know we've got to work to dramatically reduce crime. We got to intercede. We've got to intervene in their lives. We got to have programs for them. We got to deal with their education. But it's harder to do that when you have this kind of corruption going on in police departments. It's harder to do that when you have police agencies that see black people and people of color as easy targets, because they know that even if we plant drugs on them, everybody's going to believe they did it anyway, because the perception not only of whites, but even of blacks is that they have to be wrong if the police found them with something, right? So that's why you see this constant violence that you see in Baltimore City. The violence wasn't just with the people committing the murders. We had 300 and some murders last year, the highest per capita in the country. Now, when you have the highest per capita in the country in murders, then that means you have the highest per capita in the world, because ain't nobody going to beat us out in the world. You understand? But along with that, the guys who were supposed to be putting that down was part of the problem. Not all of them convicted. And then for those of you, Sergeant Russell, who are police officers, can you imagine being a police officer and now about to go to prison for 40 years? Can you imagine being 20-some years old as a police officer working at, now I know I'm not asking you to feel sorry for them, but I'm saying, can you imagine this transition they're going through? And can you give me the thought process and the philosophy that would take a police officer to do this much damage? And I'm not talking about just corruption, but the kind of corruption they was involved in. And as I always say to police departments when we do training with them, stop talking about a few rotten apples, because if there's a rotten apple in the barrel, the other apples know they're rotten and they smell them too, right? So, because you're sworn to tell on them whether they're in blue jeans or blue uniforms, so you have taken an oath. Even if you're not intimately involved in that corruption, you're supposed to tell on them. I know when I was in the FBI, I simply said to people, I'm just telling you, don't do nothing wrong around me, because I'm telling. Now, I'm saying you shouldn't do anything wrong, period. But if you do something wrong around me, I'm pointing all 10 fingers. I'm taking off my shoes. I'm pointing all 10. I'm telling on everybody. Because I ain't ending up on no slide like this. Right? But what is it in policing that has allowed us to get to here? What has it allowed us to have Officer Ruby shoot Corn Gaines in the back? What is it that allows us to do the kind of things these officers have done? So where do we go from here? Once we have the knowledge of what's going on. How do we change the behavior in police departments? How do we change the behaviors in our communities? How do we change the behavior with our young people? And I don't want to make this too, I mean, this could be a long discussion as we come up with solutions and so on and so forth. But I will say at the foundation, we've got to educate our young people. We really do. Because you can be completely innocent and be in prison a very long time. I say this to my son every time I talk to him. A 20-second decision about where you go and where you do not go could control the next 20 years of your life. A 20-second, I call it 20/20 hindsight. A 20-second decision could control where you spend the next 20 years of your life. Right? We've got to get that through to them. We got to say that every day in every way. Every night when I spoke to my son, he's away at college, I would tell him, I said, son, make good choices and decisions. You know, people would say, well, didn't you tell him you love him every night? I said, I told him to make good choices and decisions. Because whenever he met at those crossroads, I wanted him to hear that over and over again. And that's what we got to get the young people. We've got to teach them this history. We got to explain to them just because you are innocent doesn't mean you won't go to jail. We've got to really lay out this criminal justice system to them. We've got to lay out what these officers were doing and how easily it is to be caught up in this. We got to tell them what to do when stopped by the police. I tell my young people all the time, the first thing you do is turn on the interior light. The first thing you do is turn on the interior. This place was lit up. Wasn't nowhere in the world you could have seen me be. Turn on the interior light. Those little minor things that we shouldn't have to do, but we have to do. Light the car up for them. You don't need a flashlight for my car, because everything lit up. Right? Those little lessons will help tremendously, even as we work to fix the problems that we're dealing with inside police departments. Then we've got, if you want good policing, you've got to grow good police officers, right? We haven't enough children. Help some of them to go into the field of policing. It's a noble profession. It really is a noble profession if it is done right. Everybody want to be served and protected, right? You can say you don't like the police if you don't want to, but if somebody break the glass in your house tonight, I guarantee you're going to be calling them in, Mr. Police Officer. But you want good police officers responding. Here is a profession where you can work 20 years, unless you do something wrong, and retire, and there's hardly ever any layoffs. You've got children, start to develop them into being police officers. We keep saying we want good policing in our community. Well, grow police officers then. Have your children become police officers, develop good policing. Then have them become the Sergeant Davises and the Sergeant Russells and the leadership and the chiefs in the police department, because you grew them from this point. You groomed them to be there. Stop asking other people to come in as mercenary forces to police you in the right way when you have the ability to create police officers to police you in the right way. Right? Because again, I'm telling you this, no matter how much we say on occasion that we can't stand police officers, let somebody break down your door too this morning. For most of us. Some of us have other options. But for most of us, we're going to call the police. So there's some solutions we have to put in place. Concrete solutions that we have to put in place. Strategies that we have to put in place. And we've got to know this history and teach it. All of you have to know this history with your children. All of us have to know this history if you're doing social work. If you're talking to juveniles, if you're talking to young people, you've got to give them concrete solutions. They don't want philosophical, theoretical solutions. They want concretely, what do I do tomorrow? How do I handle the situation? What do I look out for? So whenever I'm talking to young groups, and I'm sure the Lacey find it the same way, they're asking me, well, what am I supposed to do when the police pull me over? And that's when I can start giving them a list. Exactly. Turn on the dome light. Turn on the interior light. Push record on your phone. You put it over on the seat if you want to. They say, oh yeah, that's good, that's good. Instead of saying philosophically, give them something concretely to do. Watch how many lives you save from those particular situations. We've got to know the history. We've got to understand these cases, and then we got to take these cases and bring them into some concrete solutions. Nobody wants philosophers anymore. They want concrete solutions. Nobody just wants good counseling anymore. They want concrete solutions about how to change their lives structurally. And that's exactly what the young people want. They want, tell me what I am to do specifically. And that's what we have to get to. All right, so I'm going to open up for questions now. Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, sure, you can. It's your mic. It's your mic.
Yeah, and then you come back. I just want to interrupt for a second and say, thank you, Dr. Powers, number one, always penetrating. You know, I sat there and I was once again mesmerized, and it brought so many things to my mind. It brought the recent case in New York City where the sergeant was just acquitted when he said that a deranged elderly black woman in her apartment came at him with a bat, and it was one of the things that you said up there, my life was in imminent danger, shot her to death, and was just acquitted by a judge. Everybody goes before a judge, it seems like nowadays, and was acquitted by a judge. It brought to mind the issue at Ramparts in California where the police were lifting fingerprints and convicting all of these people. And also in New York City, what was it? I think it was Officer Dowd, who was a member of a drug task force, Michael Dowd, a task force, and was doing all of these nefarious things. But overall, I think at the bottom line on this is really consciousness, developing a sense of our consciousness and our history and our culture to understand how to utilize those things and to do good policing. And so once again, I am mesmerized. I got to get back into this and start looking at the things that Dr. Powers said. I've been neglected. The last books I read on this was African Americans in the Criminal Justice. I mentioned this the other day, African Americans in the Criminal Justice System, the Real War on Crime. and I've kind of left it alone since that time. But now, hearing this, I just got to get back into it so that when I'm in my class, I do this briefly. I can explain this more thoroughly and more authoritatively in the classroom. So with that being said, let's bring Dr. Powers back, and he'll field whatever questions you have.
I can't fix the air conditioning, but if you got any other questions, anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes, I think we kind of went, yes. Sociologists will tell us that everybody want to belong to a group, right? And initially, again, if you go back to the history of the Crips and the Bloods, it was all about blacks trying to come together and belong to certain groups. You know, at one point, blacks couldn't join the Boy Scouts or the Club Scouts. They were separated from those groups, so they formed their own groups. They came together, and then they realized one of the advantages of the Boy Scouts and the Club Scouts is that they got financial backing, so they can pay for stuff that they need. And so these particular groups who came together as black groups decided that we've got to come up with a way to get some finances to do the things that we want to do, and that led in kind of a brief history that led into kind of the criminal activity. But everyone, and everyone sitting here today, I don't care what you say, everyone sitting here today are involved in some kind of group behavior. I know we all like to say we're rugged individuals and all, but we are caught up in group behavior, and young people more so than others. They want to belong, they want a sense of belonging, and if we don't give them something positive, a positive group, as those gangs started out before they became violent gangs and before people actually fanned the fire of those violent gangs, as I mentioned to you in COINTELPRO, when they actually had them fight against each other because they feared the unity of those particular groups and organizations coming together and doing something positive. Because if you think about it, the whole concept of the Black Panther Party for self-defense could have been used as a gang or a group, but they were a positive group doing great things, and their positivity actually made them a target to destroy what they were doing in terms of their particular behavior. So I think that's again, the history part, and I don't know how to, I say this over and over again, but I don't know how to emphasize enough. That's so important for us to be able to teach that. And I guess if I have any fear, it's not so much with the young folks, because the young folks don't know. It's the grown folks who are not teaching them on a regular basis. As you remember when we were here last year and we talked about the young people who sat in the audience, when the young man who mentioned that we only had 28 days for Black History Month, and I put up Carter G. Woodson, and he didn't know who he was, and I was saying to him, I said, well, what if we gave you 32 days? Would you know him then? Because the fact of the matter is, we were so much caught up in the philosophical that we missed the whole concrete. And I know, and I don't condemn him for that. I condemn us for not giving him that information. I try to give it to every young person who I lecture in front of, every group that I lecture in front of. I try to, because I know they want to do better. Nobody comes out of the womb wanting to be a drive-by shooter. Nobody wants to drop out of school. Nobody wants to be addicted to drugs. Babies don't come out of the womb that way. There's some intervention or lack of intervention that drives them in that direction, which means we have tremendous power, because while they're in that stage where they want to do something positive, that's when we have to intervene. I think I mentioned to you the DEA report, which said that if young people do not abuse drugs and alcohol between the age of 12 and 20, they never will. They never will. The DEA did a report and said that if you can step up your game between the age of 12 and 20, spend more time with your children, cut out going to happy hour every weekend, go to movie with them, just spend time with them. If you can lock them in from 12 to 20, then you can let them go and they will be fine, right? And then the other industries know that. The people who want them to go in the opposite direction step up their game between 12 and 20, and we get lazy, right? We got to go to happy hour, we got to go to this, we don't have time. But we have research that indicate that this is when we need to step up our game. So I think a lot of it is that we are failing our young people. They don't know any better, so they won't do any better. That's our responsibility. And a lot of it is because we're not disciplined enough to do the reading ourselves. I'm not going to do that to this particular group, but I gave a lecture. I was at Ohio University about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking to some people outside of the lecture that I gave there, interview session. Really nice setup that they have at their School of Journalism. And I was asking people, what's the last book you read? And you'd be surprised how many grown folks don't read anymore. And reading, and I don't mean Facebook, I mean, or electronic, I mean read anymore. So how am I going to teach the children about reading? You know what I mean? I tell Delacy this all the time, my children, I wanted them to read, so they had to see me reading, because children learn from observation, participation, and demonstration, and the last way they learn is a whole lot of conversation. You can't talk them to death. They need to see it. They need to see you with a book in your hand. You can't tell them to read if you don't ever have a book in your hand. I used to tell people, just put a book in your hand even if you ain't reading it. Pretend like you're reading it, right? But then people even messed that up because they had the book upside down. The children knew they wasn't reading it. But the fact of the matter is, because they need to see that. You can't tell them to do something that they never see you do. If you are their mentors, their parents, their idols, they need to see you. They will duplicate that. That's how their brains are wired. Physiologically, they're wired to observe and repeat. So the behavior they see in the street, they're doing that. But if they see you doing that, I think we talked a little while ago about trying to get my son to go to the movie, because I took my children to the movie I didn't care whether I liked the movie or not. The point of the matter was that I had to keep them here with me. It doesn't matter whether I liked the movie or not. The fact of the matter is, I knew between 12 and 20, they were coming for them. And I had to have them close. So whatever time I had to give up, because bringing a child into the world is a very selfish act, right? That's a decision you make, not the child. The child and say, can you go have sex and bring me in the world, right? That's a decision you make. So now once I've made that very selfish decision, I got to give up something. I made that decision, the child didn't. So whether I feel like giving up my Fridays or feel like giving up my evenings, I got to give them up. Whether I feel like reading or demonstrating to them, I've got to give them that. Because I made the selfish decision to bring them into the world. Now I got to give them part of me even if I don't feel like it. Part of the problem is not only just teaching the children, is teaching parenting in a kind and gentle way, because you don't want to condemn people. You know, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, teach the people, don't beat the people, because once you start beating people, they ain't never come back to hear from you again. And every time you come around me, I say, man, you ain't worth a damn. You don't do, that's not how you teach people, right? You demonstrate to them the work. But I think a lot of the mess we're seeing on our streets today, a lot of the waywardness that we're seeing with our children, they don't know any better and they're not seeing it. They've got to see it. Again, I just got to keep emphasizing, young people learn from observation, participation, and demonstration. They do not learn from a whole lot of conversation. I know, was it during the 80s or the 90s and all, when everybody used to tell you talk to the hand? You know what I mean? Because that conversation didn't mean anything. Or when we were younger, what would they say? Believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. So the young people, none of what you hear. They've got to see us doing it. Even if you got to pretend and fake it. I'll tell you, even if you got to fake it. My son was doing math that I knew nothing about. Nothing about, but I would fake like I knew something about it. He'd come in the room and he'd sit there and doing his homework. I walk by him and say, son, check number 3 again, because that don't look right. I don't know what the hell number 3 is. But he thought I did. So he checked number 3 again. He said, no, Dad, it's right. I said, is it? All right. Okay, well, that's good. He thought I was a genius. I didn't know what number 3 was. Fake it. But whatever it is, he had to have me demonstrate that I was looking at his homework. So instead of just choosing all of them, I chose like number 3 and number 15 randomly. I had to trick them into success. Whatever it takes, we got to be engaged with our children. And we got to teach other parents those tricks too. Right? Even if all of our parents are not great readers, you can fake it. Right? Like we do with our relation. I don't want to get into that. But we can fake it. You understand what I'm saying? Children have to see it. And what they're seeing is what leading them to the chaos that we're seeing in our streets today. No matter what we talk to them about, they've got to see it. They actually have to see us doing the work. My son, who ended up on a football scholarship, I went to the gym. Could I do what he did in the gym? No, but I went with him every day. Every time he went to the gym, I went to the gym with him. I was late going to work sometimes. Luckily, I put myself in a position where I could do that because I was the boss. But the fact of the matter is, because I had to be in the gym with him. I just hope he didn't walk over and see the little bit of weight I was doing. But that ain't the point. The point is I was in the gym with him. Now we have this relationship where we talk about doing everything together, except he went to see the movie without me because I was sick. I told him, wait, we'll go to the movie together to see Black Panther because I'm sick right now. He said, well, I'm going to go see it again with you, but I ain't waiting. But the fact of the matter is that that's the kind of relationship we developed together, right? Took my family on vacations every year together. Whether I enjoyed it or not, the fact of the matter is I needed them in my space at that time. No matter how tired I could get, I would never tell them that I was tired when I came home from work. Because who wants to, if you're tired every time you come home from work, what child want to grow up to be like you? Man, you say get an education so I can grow up to be like you? Yeah. Now, every day you come into work, I don't know if I want to come home like that when I grow up. So even when I was tired, I would walk in the house with energy. So they would never know I was tired. What's going on? Everybody doing? I'd go back in the room and collapse, fall out. But I couldn't let them see that the world had beat me down. Because what was that? If that was their future, if I was their father and I was already beat down, is this their future? A beat down, broken down future? So they would never see that in me. They would always see me exciting and energized. Then I go back in the room and collapse. But when I came out, what's going on? Everybody all right? You good? Everybody feeling all right? You know what I mean? Because they learn from observation, participation, and demonstration. And all your conversation, unless it's connected with what you're doing, doesn't mean anything to them. Trust me. Doesn't mean anything, because they're watching people that's doing it, and they're watching you just talk about it. And they're going to follow the people that's doing it rather than a whole lot of conversation. You just got to remember that all the time. And when we teach parenting skills, we got to teach young parents, you know, you're going to have to spend time. You're going to have to go with them. You're going to have to go with them here. You're going to have to go with them there. You're going to have to be with them because there's other people coming to get your child if you don't go with them. You made a decision to bring them in the world. You're going to have to give up some time to be with them. I know it's going to take some time out of your life, but you decided to bring them into the world. That was your choice, right? That was your choice. And so that's where we are. I think that's how we change things. And while this auditorium isn't full, as Doc said, there's enough of us here to take that information to the people we know to make the room full. You know what I mean? Whether they're in here or not, if you take and tell 5 people this today, it's almost like they were here. If you just give them, because you ain't going to remember all this. None of us do, right? Our attention span is about 20 minutes, right? In this heat right here, it's about 5 minutes, right? And we're thinking about ice cream cones. But you can at least take that information to them. That's what we have to do. C. Wright Mills, great sociologist, said, education that doesn't come with the ability to change people's lives is not education worth having. You can get all the degrees you want. You can become as educated as you want. But if your education doesn't help change the lives of others, then you're just an ignorant, educated fool. That's all you are. And when I went for all my degrees, I was determined that they were not going to be just for me or not just going to be for my salary. If I couldn't take my education and help parents become better parents, help children become better children, help police officers become better police officers, then it wasn't worth having at all. I don't need that just for show, right? He was a great sociologist. You can look him up, C. Wright Mills. And he got tired of all these people with these advanced degrees having all this knowledge but changing no one's lives. And I never wanted to be that way. So all the knowledge you get, please pass it on to others in some form or fashion or the other. Any other questions? I want to show you this one book. Can you grab that book out of my book bag right there? Oh my goodness. Maybe I should have got the Lacey to do it. No, not that. Thank you, now. Thank you, Carol. Go ahead. Have anyone read this book?
No.
He's an excellent. He can't kill us off. He's an excellent writer for the Washington Post. And what he does is he goes through each, and he covered it, everything from Ferguson to Freddie Gray. He covered all of them in detail. And in his writing about the different situations, whether it was Ferguson, whether it was the Freddie Gray situation, whether it was the shooting up in Cleveland tomorrow. He covers them all. But what's so interesting about this story, and why I strongly suggest that if you get a chance in reading it, is that what he says in his book was that because he covered these stories, and because he covered them in a fashion that talked about the pain brought to the families, that he received threats. He was a writer, writing about Ferguson, writing about Cleveland, writing about New York, writing about Baltimore, and people began to threaten his family. They hacked into his system, threatened his mother. This is the writer. He talks about covering all these events, and then he talked about the toll it took on him and his family. People tweeted and wrote things to him and his family, threatening his family, because he was just a writer for the Washington Post telling the stories of these particular situations. Right? And this book deals with, he says, the story of the struggle for black lives. But it's really a great book. It's an easy read, but it covers all of those situations. Every one of those situations are covered in this book. Every one of those cities are covered in this relative. And it's a relatively small book, so you might read it. But you can read it in chapters because it covers each one. It's an excellent book for students who want to know about each one of those police shootings, because he covered all of them in here, and the aftermaths and the rebellions that occurred with those, and then the pain that the people felt, the key players and those protests and all. It's a wonderful book if you get a chance to read it. All right? It can't kill us all. Any other questions? My book, I had it here last year. And then, this is my book. But everybody should have it by now. It's relatively old. I had it here last year. All right. It's my life story. It's a biography about everything that happened to my life that made me who I am today and why I am who I am today. Any other questions, concerns, problem? Everybody sleep now? All right. Thank you all very much for your attention.